You don't forget because your brain gets old. You forget because of what you do to it every single day. And here where I live, we always knew that. My grandfather passed away at 93. A full mind, clear eyes, sharp as the edge of a good plow blade until the very end. He remembered the names of every neighbor's horse from 40 years back. He'd sit at the supper table and tell stories about his childhood with the kind of detail most people half his age couldn't muster. And he wasn't special among us. Not here. Not in our community. That kind of mind is common here. What the English world calls dementia, this creeping, steady theft of who a person is, we simply don't see it the way they do outside. And I don't say that to boast. I say it because something in how we live is doing something that the world outside has almost completely walked away from. And if you're watching this, if your memory has started to slip, if you walk into a room and stand there wondering why you came, if names disappear right when you need them most, I want you to hear this. It is not your age. It is something else entirely. Let me show you what I mean. My grandmother, on my mother's side, lived on a farm her entire life. She baked bread every morning, kept a large garden, walked to the barn twice a day regardless of weather. She died at 91 without ever once forgetting a face, a birthday, or a recipe. I remember sitting with her when I was young and asking her how she remembered so much. She laughed that low, quiet laugh she had and said, "Amos, the mind is like a field. You stop working it, it goes to weeds." I didn't understand what she meant then. Now, after 60-some years of living this way, I understand it completely. The English world talks a lot about dementia, billions of dollars, mountains of research, shelves full of pills. And still, the numbers keep rising. More people are losing their minds at younger and younger ages. More families are sitting across the table from someone they love who no longer knows their name. And the doctors, God bless them, they're working hard. But somewhere along the way, they got so focused on the pill that they stopped asking about the field. Because here is what I have seen in my own community over and over again for my entire life. The people among us who lived to their 80s and 90s with their minds fully intact, and there are many, almost none of them spent their lives sitting still. Almost none of them ate out of packages. Almost none of them slept alone in silence while a screen buzzed and flickered in their bedroom. They worked with their hands, they ate real food, they slept hard and woke with purpose. They belonged to something larger than themselves. And they never, not once, had to invent a reason to get up in the morning. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You're thinking, "That's nice, Amos, but I'm not Amish. I can't just start farming." And I'm not asking you to. What I want to share with you today are the specific things we do, the habits, the patterns, the quiet daily choices that I believe account for why so few of us suffer this particular kind of loss. Not all at once. We're going to take this one piece at a time because each piece matters on its own and because the way they work together is the thing that most people outside these communities have never been told. But I want to start with the one that surprises people most. Because when I describe our life here, the first thing folks from the English world usually say is, "Oh, it must be the food." And the food does matter. We'll get to that. But food is not where I'd start. The thing that I believe does the most damage to the aging mind in the modern world is something far less obvious. Something you would never look at and immediately say, "That is stealing my memory." What is it? Silence. Or rather, the wrong kind of silence. Let me explain what I mean. Here where I live, there is no such thing as being alone with nothing to do. That's almost an impossible condition. If you are awake, you are engaged with something, a task, a person, a craft, an animal, a problem to solve. Our hands are almost always occupied. We're building or mending or planting or cooking or sitting with someone and having a real conversation that requires you to listen, to think, to respond. The brain, every hour of every day, is being asked to do something. Now compare that to what I hear from so many people in the English world who reach their late 60s and 70s. They retire, the children are grown, the house is quiet, the routine that gave shape to their whole life gone. And they sit, they watch television for hours, they scroll through things on their phones, They stop being asked hard questions by anyone, including themselves. They stop making decisions that carry real weight. They stop learning things that require genuine effort. And I am not judging. I understand how that happens. The modern world tells people that rest is the reward for a life of work, that after 65, you've earned the right to stop, to do less, to slow down. But the brain did not get that message, because the brain, my friend, is not like a muscle that needs rest after the work is done. It is more like a fire. You stop feeding it, you stop poking it, you stop giving it something to burn, it dims. Slowly, steadily, quietly, it dims. And that dimming has a name, and the English world calls it normal aging. But here where I live, we don't see it that way. And we never have. My father worked with wood his whole life. He was a craftsman, furniture mostly, things that people use and passed on to their children. He was doing careful joinery work at 81, small cuts, fine measurements, hand planing a surface until it was true. He told me once that the day he stopped making things would be the day he started dying. He lived to 89 with his mind completely clear. What he was doing with that woodwork, the planning, the measuring, the small adjustments, the problem solving, the pride of finishing something, well, all of that was feeding the fire every day, without calling it therapy or brain training or any of the names the English world puts on it. He was doing exactly what the mind needs to stay alive and sharp. If you've been sitting more than you should, if you've been defaulting to television and putting off anything that feels like real effort, that is not rest. That is dimming the fire. And the good news, the genuinely good news, is that the fire can be fed again. It's not too late. The brain is more willing to recover than most people are ever told. If you find what I'm sharing here useful and you'd like to hear more of the way we live, stay close. There's an easy way to make sure you don't miss what's coming next, and it asks nothing of you. Now here is where it gets interesting, because the handwork, the daily engagement, the keeping the mind occupied, all of that is essential. But there's a second thing we do, something so simple. You almost laugh when I say it, and yet it may be the piece that ties everything else together. We eat together. I mean, truly together. Not with a screen on the table, not someone checking something in their pocket, not a meal eaten standing at the counter while the day falls apart around you. We sit, we look at each other, we talk, we hear about what happened, what someone is worried about, what a child learned, what an elder is thinking. Every meal is a small gathering, and it has been that way for as long as any of us can remember. Now, you might think this is just a nice custom, a cultural thing, something that feels good but doesn't touch the brain in any real way. But I want to push back on that real conversation, the kind where you have to listen, track what someone else is saying, hold your own thoughts until it's your turn. Remember what was said 5 minutes ago so you can respond to it properly. That is hard cognitive work, and most people in the modern world are doing less and less of it. Text messages are not the same. Short comments on a screen are not the same. A real unhurried conversation at a table with people you love, with bread you baked and food you grew, that is something entirely different. My wife and I have eaten every supper together at the same table for over 40 years. We disagree. We talk through problems. We tell stories. We laugh at things that only make sense to us because of shared history. That history, that living record of a shared life, is itself a kind of daily exercise for the memory. You can't keep up your end of a real conversation without your memory pulling its weight. And beyond the meal, there is the matter of belonging. This is something I have thought about more as I've gotten older. There is a loneliness epidemic in the English world. The doctors there talk about it openly now. People in their 70s and 80s who go days without a real conversation, who live surrounded by millions of people and are in every meaningful sense alone. And that loneliness does something to the brain. It is not just sad. It is physically damaging in a way that most people outside these communities have never been told plainly. Here where I live, that kind of isolation is almost impossible. We are woven into each other. If an older member of our community is struggling, someone shows up. There is always a neighbor, a family member, a church brother or sister who comes There is always a reason to be somewhere, to be needed, to be expected. That belonging, that being woven into a life that continues to ask things of you, I believe it keeps the mind in its place in a way that no pill has ever matched. I am not a doctor. I want to say that plainly. What I am sharing is the way of life I was raised in. The patterns I have watched keep the minds of the people I love clear and strong into very old age. If you have concerns about your health, if a doctor is walking alongside you, please keep that conversation going. That is the sensible thing. What I offer is not a prescription. It is a window into how we live and an invitation to borrow from it whatever fits your life. Now let me bring this to the part that most of you have been waiting for, because the engagement of the hands, the shared meals, the belonging, all of that matters enormously. But there is one daily habit in our community that I have come to believe is perhaps the single most overlooked piece of the memory puzzle. And when I describe it to people from the English world, many of them tell me they stopped doing it years ago without realizing what they were giving up. We walk every single day, not for exercise, not because a doctor told us to hit a certain number of steps. We walk because there is somewhere to go, something to carry, someone to see, work to be done that requires us to move through the world on our own legs. My mornings begin before sunrise. By the time the sun is fully up, I have already walked to the barn, back to the house, out to the garden to check what needs tending, across to a neighbor's if something needed discussing. Without counting a single step or wearing a single device, I have moved my body through real purpose for the first morning hours. And what that movement does, steady, unhurried, outdoors, in the air and the light, is something the English world spends a great deal of money trying to replicate in gyms and clinics. The blood moves. The oxygen reaches the brain. The eyes are working on distance and detail and changing light instead of a fixed screen 18 inches away. The mind is occupied with real-world problems, the state of the garden, the way a fence post is leaning, what a neighbor's face tells you about how they're doing. Every single one of those small observations is a tiny act of memory, of attention, of engagement. We were never taught to think of walking as medicine. We just walked because life required it. And in that requirement, we got something that the modern world has to work very hard to consciously put back. If your legs carry you, use them every day. Not for a number, not for a device. Walk to somewhere real with something in your hands or on your mind. Walk in the morning if you can, when the light is new and the air is cool. Walk with someone if you have someone to walk with, because then the conversation adds its own layer to everything I described earlier. And walk outside where your eyes and ears and the whole sensing body have to be awake to the world around you. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. And I believe, with everything I have seen in a long life lived among people who keep their minds sharp well into old age, that it is one of the most powerful things a person can offer their brain without spending a single dollar. Here is what all of this comes back to, if I had to put it in my grandmother's words. The mind is a field. You stop working it, it goes to weeds. But the work doesn't have to be hard or complicated or expensive. It just has to be consistent, purposeful, and real. Real conversation, real movement, real engagement with the hands, real belonging to something that asks something of you every day. That is the Amish way, not because we planned it, not because some study told us to, because it is simply how a human life was always meant to be lived. If your memory has slipped, if your mornings feel foggy and your evenings feel empty, you have not crossed a line you can't walk back from. The fire can be fed. The field can be worked again. It is not too late, my friend. It is simply time to begin. Tell me in the comments, what's the one thing your body or your mind struggles with most after 60? I read every one of them, and your answer matters to what I share next. And stay close, because next time I'll share the way we sleep here, a practice so simple the English world calls it old-fashioned, but one that we believe is why so many of our people wake at 80 feeling rested in a way most people half that age have forgotten is even possible.